Welcome and hello, everyone. I'm Candace Frederick, she, her pronouns. I'm today's host, and we're going to be delving into a very rich topic on menstrual well-being. I wanted to start off with a thank you to Stacey Ann Buchanan for all that she's done to help us create a safe space for this discussion. Thanks so much for joining us and taking time to hear our thoughts as we share some of our critical reflections on this topic. And joining me today are my two very knowledgeable and brilliant colleagues, Tak Bandal, she, her pronouns, and Melissa Sumnath, she, her pronouns. And I just wanted to start off by saying that we acknowledge the many lived experiences that fall under this topic. And we will be using people who experience periods throughout, as well as variations on that phrase. And a special shout out to our colleague for that note. And we just also want to say that we leave a lot of space in this discussion for the many presentations of identity that exist in relation to menstruation, including folks who identify as trans. Thank you for that. And just gonna turn over to a land acknowledgement so that we start off in a good way. In the spirit of reconciliation, we collectively acknowledge that it is a privilege to work and learn on the ancestral and traditional territories of many Indigenous nations. We recognize Toronto as Treaty 13 land and the specific territories of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabeg, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. On a personal note, my family immigrated here from Grenada in the Caribbean in the early 80s for safety and opportunity, as many immigrant families have done and continue to do. And I always want to say that, I and we have benefited greatly from the knowledge and the trailblazing of many Indigenous ancestors and the many folks in communities who continue to live and work on Turtle Island. So thank you for that. And to add to this, I've been thinking a lot about ancestors and legacies. I've been thinking a lot about what it means to access freedom in the context of ongoing violence. And I've been thinking about intergenerational trauma alongside of intergenerational wisdom. So to end off my land acknowledgement, I want to say that my hope for all of us is that we think about how we can be good ancestors so that the people coming behind us inherit a more just and free world. And on that note, before we get into our discussion, which is going to be fire today, we wanted to start off with a body-based practice. And I'm just going to say a few things, and then I'm going to turn it over to Tak. We'd like to first say that we know that every person has a different relationship to their body. So please only participate if you would like, and please feel free to stop if you are uncomfortable in some way. This is really only an invitation. And we know that sometimes there can be a feeling of calm with body-based practices, but also it can bring up a lot. So trust your body to be your guide. Over to you, Tak.
Thanks so much, Candace, for that opening and acknowledgement. I also want to thank our amazing producer and director, Stacey Ann, for creating this container and space for us, and to my colleagues, Candace and Melissa, for holding space with me. So I'll say, Sat Sri Akal, mera naam Takdir Kaur Pandal hai. I am based in Halifax on Mi'kmaq Treaty Territories, and the body-based practice that I'll share today, I'll acknowledge my ancestors who come from the Punjab region of India and Pakistan, who have shared the chakra system with me. So many of us might be aware, or this might be new knowledge to you all, that, you know, the world is made up of energy, and within our bodies, within our space, within our field, many of us experience seven chakras or energy centers, from the top of our head all the way down to our root, the base of our spine and our pelvic center. And oftentimes in our work, especially now in the pandemic, we spend a lot of time literally up here in our head. So this practice is inviting all of us, regardless of how we identify, just to ground down to the earth, feel our relationship to the earth, so that we can create that sustainable, loving relationship and reconnect to our ancestors in that way. So whenever you all are ready, I'm going to invite you to close your eyes. And if you feel comfortable, you can follow along in terms of visualizing and feeling. If you'd just like to observe and witness today, you can just listen to the sound of my voice. You also don't have to close your eyes if you don't really feel like it. So whenever you're ready, I'm just going to invite all of us to tune into the rhythm of our own breath today. Just noticing where it's at. And maybe even taking a deep breath into the base of our lungs. So deep down, almost into our bellies. Well done, y'all. So what I'm going to invite us to visualize is the core of the earth. So the center of the earth, we can imagine like this is where lava comes from. It is fiery, it is red, orange, these sorts of hues. It's dynamic, it moves. It's maybe a circle or a ball of intense energy. And then I'd like us to just imagine and notice an orange and red energy near the base of our spine, in our pelvic center, whatever that looks like and feels like to you all, of a similar hue and texture, knowing that that base and energetic space actually connects us to the earth through a cord, an energetic cord. So what we're going to then do is imagine that core of the earth. So we'll go down, imagine going down our feet, down through the dirt. We're seeing a trail of energy connecting us to the core of the earth. And we're going to ask the earth for permission, take a consent-based approach, and ask if we can borrow some of that energy today. We'll wait for them to answer yes. If the answer is no, then we can just witness and listen. If the answer is yes, then we'll imagine some of that energy from the core of the earth coming down and coming up as if a cord, all the way up through those various layers, up through the dirt, up through the surface of the earth, through the bottom of the building that we're living in, through the floor, up our legs, into our pelvic center, flowing up and in, providing us energy there, and then flowing back down through another cord, back down into the earth, taking anything that needs to be composted down with it. So in this way, we're creating a feedback loop of energy from the core of the earth coming up through our legs into our pelvic center, clearing anything out that needs to be cleared, whether that's limiting beliefs or trauma, fears, pain, and then taking it down into the core of the earth where it is alchemized, composted, burnt, and back, up and down, and up and down. Now we'll just ask permission to the earth to do this feedback loop on autopilot. So even when we're not thinking about it, this core grounded earth root energy that symbolizes our ancestors, that symbolizes the strength of our people, that symbolizes the love that we have for the earth, we'll just continue to feed up into our bodies and take anything that's ready to be released out in service of our own health and well-being, in service of the health of the collective, in service of the health of the earth itself. So whenever you're ready, I'm just going to invite you to feel your feet on the ground, whatever surface they're on, wiggling your toes, just feeling grateful to the earth for holding you there. You can rub your hands against your thighs or rub them together, just bringing awareness back to the outside of our bodies. Maybe a little jazz hand action, a little dance in your seat, or if you're standing. And then whenever you're ready, you can open your eyes and come back into the room. Welcome back, y'all. Welcome back. So thank you so much for participating. And I'll pass it back over to you, Candace.
Thank you so much for that, Tak. And I love just starting off with a note on a feedback loop and a note on consent. So thanks for really bringing that into the room to ground us for this discussion, and the reminder also that we are connected to our environments. Thank you so much. So to start off, I thought, as we've been preparing and thinking about this and drawing from all of the different areas that we're knowledgeable in, it might be good to just start off the discussion thinking about why this topic is important to discuss. So maybe on that note, Melissa, I can turn it over to you to start us off, and then we'll see where we go from there.
Thank you so much. I'm so honored to be sharing space with both of you. Special thanks to our producer and director, Stacey Buchanan, as well. I really love the centering of ancestors in that. I call in my great grandmother, Budni Kalu, who is one of these folks that helped love me up into the person I am today. Why do I think this is important? It's been a long journey of moving from shame to empowerment in relationship to my period. I'll call pre-pandemic times the before times. In the before times at my desk at work, I was that person that had like the snacks and the things, right? The Tylenol and the tampons. And I think about where I put those tampons on my desk. They are in the darkest corner, hidden away behind all of the things. And so, I've done a lot of work around changing the relationship I have to my period. Learning more around how in some cultures, in particular Indigenous communities, believe that, someone who menstruates is sacred and powerful. That is a sense of strength and wisdom. That was sort of, my mind went sort of, what? I've never felt powerful in my period. And what that can do, given that so many of us menstruate, like 8.8 million in Canada. It's a lot of us. And how silent it is. There's not a lot of talk around this. And so those are a few things that come to mind when I think about why this topic is important. Yeah.
Thank you so much for starting us off, Melissa. And 8.8 million in Canada. Wow. That's a lot of folks. And thanks for also bringing up that relationship piece. I very much relate to that personally in terms of, like my own journey and just like how I think about health and stigma around health and how menstrual well-being still seems to be, as you said, a hidden topic in the area of when we're talking about health and self-care. This somehow still seems to be left off the table. Would you like to jump in, Tak?
Yeah, I would love to. And I just love this conversation. So, very happy to be part of it. For me, in terms of why I think it's important, I mean, I do a lot of work in the menstrual health sphere. I run an Instagram page called I'm with Period. So, I honestly could go on and on about why I think it's important. However, what really stands out to me is I'm that person at a party, or if we go for lunch and I'm meeting someone for the first time, I will casually / not so casually bring up periods in conversation. And I find I just need to name it and say it. And all of a sudden, I just get gifted story upon question upon story about periods, about the full cycle. And so I think it's important to talk about because people just have these stories that they are ready to share, that they are ready to joke about, to cry about, to ask questions about. So I know that it's important so that we can create these open spaces of dialogue in order to move a conversation of menstrual cycles away from always being so rooted in pain and shame and negativity, and at least towards neutral, and maybe even to potentially seeing some of the positives of this experience.
Thank you so much for that. And just talking about periods in conversation, and just like thinking about that and thinking about all of the things that maybe don't get said when we ask each other how we're doing. And if we are one of those people with periods, are we able to say, I have cramps, or it's not a good day, or I'd rather be lying down? Like, what are those conversations, and how do we cultivate, more space for open dialogue that isn't just in a medicalized realm? So, just some of what you said, Tak, made me start to think, along those lines, and just like thinking about how we live in a world where, when it comes to mental health, to a certain degree, and alternative health practices to a certain degree, and self-care to a certain degree, there is conversation and there is, some progress, I think we can say, in terms of willingness to discuss. And, just thinking about, what on the stigma side, what might prevent people who experience periods from talking about menstrual health openly at work or in life, as we're thinking about how to cultivate those open areas of dialogue. And I certainly have many thoughts about that, but wondering if either one of you want to jump in there.
I'd love to. In terms of that, the reframing around it being seen as weakness. And, in the before times when that topic would come up, it would always be in a whisper. Hey, do you have any tampons? Right? It would never be at a volume higher than that. And so already it's, I think, put to the side. If we want to outperform, if we want to prove ourselves, and we're already running this dialogue or this narrative around not good enough or not credible enough, then for sure, menstruators, I can see how that would be put aside around, I'll just get through it. I'll just suck it up. Those are some things that really came through for me. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Melissa. Tak, do you want to riff off of anything Melissa said, or, jump in with something else altogether.
Yeah, I definitely resonate with so much of what you both are saying. One thing that I notice around that piece that you mentioned, Candace, around like why there is stigma surrounding it, or why there might be silence in these conversations, or why they're not brought up as much, is I think that growing up, I was born and raised just outside Metro Vancouver on Coast Salish territories. I went to public school. My parents immigrated to Canada in the 80s, and English is their second language. And so I didn't get a lot of education around periods and menstrual cycles. And that I did get was very textbook. So it was literally one image of a uterus that was just reproduced in every biology textbook I ever read. And often the narrative was, the cycle is 28 days. On day 14, one ovulates, which is actually not true. Like, everyone's cycle is their own unique fingerprint. People ovulate at different times. People's cycle lengths are different depending on whether they're experiencing stress, whether they might identify with having PCOS. So I think maybe where the silence comes up is when folks feel like they deviate from this norm that has been created by like a colonial medical system. They don't want to talk about it because it's like, oh God, I'm like, mine isn't normal, so I'm not going to say anything because I don't want to either. I'm too scared to learn what that means. If I am different from this sort of norm that's been created. And I get a lot of private messages like, is this normal? Like, what am I supposed to be doing? I didn't get my period for the last 2 months. And these sorts of pieces that people feel more comfortable sharing in private or in confidence, as opposed to sharing out loud. And I think the more we have conversations like this, we will be able to open up the multiple perspectives, multiple worldviews, multiple experiences of what menstrual cycles can look like in the workplace and in life in general.
Thank you so much for that. I really, that piece around deviating from the normal, and I'm using that word in quotations because I don't know what that is, but how a colonial mindset and how like a Western Eurocentric system also, positions us, in relation to our bodies, or, our understanding, and how much like we all individually fight to know our bodies, to know our cycles, to be curious when we don't fit into whatever that particular lane is that we're being taught. And I mean, I don't know a lot of people in that lane, to be honest with you. And and so I'm just thinking about that piece about, how do we cultivate more curiosity? How do we, even the things that we say to ourselves? I was really struck by what you said, Melissa, about not being good enough. I'll just get through it. And this idea of private and public that shows up in this conversation, I think that this is somehow an individual private thing that is separate from colonial structures, that is separate from capitalism, that is separate from poverty and economics and living in cities. And so, yeah, just that's not really a question. That's more a reflection. And wondered if either one of you wanted to tease out, any of those pieces. I know I said a whole long list of things, so apologies for that. But I think that, this topic really opens up the door to so many systemic and structural pieces. And I don't know if that piece is even talked about because it's constructed as a very individual thing. So yeah, just curious about your thoughts on that, Tak or Melissa.
The individual thing really sticks out for me there, especially when like menstrual hygiene products is big business. It's big business. So, for instance, the global market was 38.9 billion in 2022, or pardon me, 2020, and it's projected to be double that in 2030. And so it's so interesting because that really resonates with me as well in terms of it feeling like an individual thing that you don't talk about, or if you do, you talk about it with a doctor, not necessarily a circle of folks. I took this female mastermind, empowerment mastermind, and I realized that it was kind of the first place where there was open dialogue around my relationship to my menstrual cycle, my relationship to moon cycles in general, for instance, and how there's a relationship there. So yeah, I really appreciate that piece that you've brought in there, Candace. Thank you.
Thanks.
Oh, and sorry, I'll just bring in, I'm still feeling my connection to the core of the earth, Tak. Thank you so much. It's been feedback looping this whole time, so I really appreciate that.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Tak, do you want to add anything or weigh in or even take us in a different direction?
Yeah, I so appreciate all of this. So two pieces that kind of stood out to me as you all were sharing your wisdom. One is around that individuality piece and thinking about how we can start to think about cycles in relation to collective care. I know that's something that we talk a lot about at BIPOC Executive Search, in terms of people, but in terms of the earth as well. So when you brought up the period products, Melissa, something that I feel really passionate about is supporting people to be able to access reusable menstrual supplies, so cloth pads, period underwear, menstrual cups, and so on, in a way that feels accessible to them. And in a way that allows us to move beyond understandings of, let's say, period blood as something that needs to be hidden or like quickly thrown away into the waste and is seen as waste and garbage. I share this because in India, where my ancestors are from, and in Pakistan as well, people have been using cloth since time immemorial. But over the last few years, because of the way that capitalism, colonialism operates, there's been a huge push towards single-use supplies as a way to view oneself as like Western or modern if you use a disposable pad, and cloth as seen as something dirty or backwards. Whereas here in the borders of Canada, now it's like if you use a cloth pad with like cute cats on it, you're like modern and sustainable. So I find that individual piece and that individual choice that we have can also link to the collective, can also be a form of activism in terms of what we feel like we can choose to catch our blood. And then the second piece that came up for me, Candace, when you were speaking around Eurocentrism and the impact that colonialism has had, I really think that we have created this binary of menstrual cycles, just in terms of like, let's say gender, in terms of naming a binary gender as it relates to menstrual cycles, or even sex, like biological male, biological female, and this reproduction of binaries. And I'm very interested in moving beyond that, because as I shared, everyone's menstrual cycle is unique to them. It's like a fingerprint, it's like a constellation, as opposed to a binary. So those are things that come up for me in this conversation, is how do we start to interlink this movement back towards creating a right relationship with the earth and moving beyond colonial heteropatriarchal binaries and like seeing those things as interwoven in the realm of menstrual well-being.
Wow. We are going a lot of places. And I am loving it.
Here for it.
And yeah, totally. And just really wanting to say that piece, when you talked about a constellation,
Mm.
I felt that. I felt that in my body. Just that word, I think, opens things up to more possibility and more plurality, because I feel that have been many losses, like as part of the colonial project and as part of systems and structures and systems of oppression, but that plurality gets lost.
Mm.
Has been lost, that existed, pre-contact for many communities. And just thinking about that, and thinking about just the pieces that you shared about how a move towards like cloth projects might be read in India versus in Canada, and the reasons behind that.
Mm.
And so how we can't really separate out the individual from the environment, from the systemic. And I think another piece that I was holding as both you and Melissa were speaking and dropping all of your wonderful gems as you do, was just around, for folks who are maybe that piece around curiosity is hard, that piece around tracking cycles is hard, that piece around where what does it mean to leave room also for folks who are kind of like, this is not what I want to be happening
Mm.
in my body.
Mm.
And so, in how we talk about cycles and periods and menstruation, how do we, I guess, like leave a bit more space for plurality, and for us to access agency and authenticity in terms of the range of experiences that exist. Any thoughts on that?
I would love to jump in around that piece around, period blood being dirty and something that we're supposed to get rid of right away. That really hit a nerve there. I could feel that in my core of, we bleed monthly, but it's not like we've gone into battle or injured. It's not that this blood leads to, generally speaking, infection, right? And so I think that's a really interesting, when we're thinking about the colonial project or patriarchal systems, what that does to individuals, going back to from that individual over to, there's many different experiences here. So really appreciate that. If I may, just in terms of that authenticity, I think we've all heard a lot of this kind of discussions around authenticity at work and what it means to bring our whole selves to work. And so if having my period is a part of bringing my whole self to work, what does that mean there? Those are some things that came up for me, Candice and Tak, while you were speaking as well. I'll pause there.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I think that's a really important point. What does that mean to bring our whole selves, and the many ways that we interact with health and bodies to work? I think that's a question for all of us to think about and create space for. Any thoughts on that, Tak, or on something else? Just want to invite as much conversation as we have time for.
Yes, definitely. So picking up on something you said, Candice, around the plurality of experiences in the workplace, in our life, and some folks feeling like they did not choose this experience and would rather not have the experience. I think that's really important to acknowledge as well, because, I do a lot of work in the menstrual health sphere. There's a lot of folks, which I think is amazing, like rah periods. They like use their period blood to like fertilize their plants and are like having all these ceremonies under the moon, which is amazing. And then there's folks that I meet who would rather not have a period and actively work to move away from like the feminization of menstrual cycles. And so that's something that really resonates with me. And I'd like to acknowledge that, you know, I identify as a woman, I identify as a cis woman, as female. So this is not a lived experience that I can speak to and from, but it's something that I'm learning more about and I listen actively on, just thinking about the multiplicity of folks who might identify with having periods. So that's one piece that I've been thinking about as you all were speaking. And another piece is around menopause. Menstrual cycles get, you know, a lot of attention, especially the period part of a menstrual cycle. It's like the it thing that we often talk about. But in terms of that piece around uncomfortability or plurality of experiences, menopause in the workplace, maybe because of, you know, the folks who have been going through menopause and the eras in which they have been growing up and they have been coming into the workplace, there hasn't been as much conversation about it. But I know that now that those conversations are happening more and more. So that's an aspect of menstrual well-being, that transition into the next phase of life that can be really uncomfortable as well, like in terms of fluctuations of hormones, in terms of what one might be going through sitting at a desk or going through a meeting, and trying to manage our bodies in some ways. Again, not something that I can speak to yet, but certainly something that I've been receiving gratefully a lot of stories about. So things that I'm thinking about, less wisdom that I can share, but pieces that definitely I feel are important to the conversation.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you so much for naming those experiences, right? I think that's so important. Like the fact that we're having this conversation, you know, but that gem that you said, TAC, the feminization of menstrual cycles, I wrote that down because I think that, you know, that is true. And, you know, and I think that, you know, like one of the hopes that I have in terms of thinking about menstrual well-being in a more holistic way is definitely a hope for more plurality of experience and more nuance and more conversation, like the conversation we're having now. And on that note, I'm wondering, you know, what the two of you think it might mean to think about how we might destigmatize or how we might move towards something that that we would prefer, you know, whether it be in our workplaces or in life in general, as we think about menstrual well-being and some shifts that we hope will happen in terms of how we think about this topic or talk about it. Any thoughts on that?
I'd love to jump in here. You know, I've really centered agency, more thinking about plurality, and that folks get to choose which parts of themselves they want to share. And, you know, there are certain organizations or parts of the globe that have things like period leaves, let's say, for instance, or, you know, they give folks that menstruate a few days off every month. And so it wouldn't necessarily be something that you would need to claim under a period leave, but, you know, days that could contribute towards that. You know, I think as well, when I'm thinking about my own emotional navigational GPS, that's part of how I navigate through my own period. And there are certain things that are going to come up based on where I am in that cycle. And I love that piece that you brought forward too, TAC, around it's different, like a constellation. Yes, please. I'm all about that. And so, you know, how is it that we can make it in a way at work where we're honoring that this is part of us. There's so much talk around live experience being part of the qualifications of a role, of a position. And so I see this as part of that lived experience. What do you two think?
Mm. Do you want to jump in, Tak? I can also jump in too.
Sure, I'd love to. And then I'd love to hear your thoughts, Candace. I really appreciate you sort of sounding back to us what you're picking up and sharing your wisdom as well. So your question was around how do we deconstruct stigma and move away potentially from that. So for me, one practice that I tend to use is to move away from like the medicalized language of menstrual cycles, especially since that language often centers pregnancy and conception and childbearing as like the sole purpose of menstrual cycles, which is important. Like all of us are here on this earth because of that. So I appreciate that. Appreciate, folks who gave birth to us. And at the same time, I feel that when we move away from that, we can open up this whole other realm, exciting realm of how menstrual cycles can allow us to tap into like our power as people. So you all have heard me talk about menstrual cycles and manifestation and how we can use the 4 seasons of menstrual cycles to manifest our dream life, to be able to manifest social justice and sustainable futures. So I personally tend to focus on a lot of the positive aspects of menstrual cycles, not to negate the pain or anything, but it's just something I notice is so much of like memes, culture around periods or conversation around periods is very much rooted in like pain with like knives going through a uterus. And it's very, very focused on that. And again, I appreciate it, but something that I really privilege in my life, having grown up in a fairly violent home, like not always feeling safe, is that now where I live now, I've created a sense of safety and I really like to focus on that positivity. So that's something that I use to deconstruct the stigma is create entry points for people to, again, move towards that neutral place, but then also start to see like the beauty and the positivity and the possibilities that can come when we tune into our menstrual cycle. Yeah.
Wow.
Wow.
The two of you are saying so much. And I think, as much as I love our title, Menstrual Wellbeing, it's turning into menstrual constellations. Maybe that will be part 2. But so really enjoying this conversation, and I think it's making me like reflect on. Thank you both for like the lens that you offer around because I think one of the questions that I'm left sitting with is what this experience can offer me. That I have monthly, or like shout out to people who also experience irregularity in that. So maybe not monthly. But, this is like, for me, like an experience personally of release. This is an experience where, I've had to, over the years, cultivate gratitude towards my body, however my body is showing up. Right. And I think in a world where we are being asked to do more, especially as racialized folks, having some time to actually, this cycle, this journey that I'm on, allows for like a slowing down at times. And I think that, the fact that my body is teaching me about resistance, I think is powerful. Do you want to say something there, Melissa?
Oh, I felt that. I really felt that my body is teaching me something about resistance. Wow. I got to sit with that for a moment.
Definitely.
I've
Definitely.
never heard it in that relation. I've got to sit with that. I really resonated.
Yeah. This is real talk times
Mm.
for sure. um, and so, like, maybe continuing as we're sitting with, what we've all shared and said. And so I'm wondering, if there are particular ways, as we're talking about destigmatizing, and moving more towards some things that, either we're doing individually or that we would prefer to see show up in our communities and societies, are there, along those lines, and we might have answered this already, but are there particular ways that we can continue to normalize, plurality and menstrual well-being and cycles and all of the things that we said, again, at work, but in life in general. And it could just be that we have more conversations like this, period. See what I did there? um, but curious if you have any thoughts or anything else that maybe you want to say on this topic, Tak or Melissa.
Go for it, Tak.
Yeah, it's a great question, Candace. So just in terms of sort of final, not final thoughts, but things that are coming up as we sort of get to the close. One piece is when we're thinking about constructing health in terms of menstruation and menstrual cycles, I'm thinking about constructing it through an intersectional lens. So thinking about, gender, sex, sexuality, racialized identity, religion, ancestral lineage, age, economic status, geography, and so forth. How do we construct it, taking in all of those pieces into consideration? So, for instance, there's two that I can highlight. One is around gender and sex and sort of deconstructing that binary. I'm thinking about my colleague Cass, who runs an Instagram page called Tony the Tampon, and they're based in the US, in the borders of the US, and a photo of them went viral that said trans men bleed too, and it's a photo of them sitting on a bench free bleeding. And so thinking about constructing health beyond that gender binary, which we've talked about, and then also with respect to religion. So coming from India, obviously there are a multiplicity of religions that are practiced there. And I often talk about four in particular: Buddhism, Sikhism, Islam, and Hinduism, and how over the years, they started many thousands and moons ago with really positive interpretations of periods and menstrual cycles. And I write about this quite often. But over time, colonialism, patriarchy, capitalism, all those pieces have led to them being stigmatized in the community, to the point where sometimes menstruators are not allowed to practice within temples and gurdwaras, mandirs, mosques, and show up on their periods. And those things are changing now. So in 2019, there was a protest of folks who menstruate who created I think it was 500-kilometer human wall holding hands to protest their exclusion from religious sites. So I think as we continue to construct these new understandings or old ancestral understandings and revitalize them, that intersectionality is really, really important. And I'm grateful to Dr. Crenshaw and Dr. Patricia Hill Collins for sharing that work with us. Yeah.
Thank you. I couldn't agree more in terms of intersectionality and what that could offer us, and how we can then start to really expand this conversation, look at different nuances of experience, and again, what that could offer us in terms of not just experience, but in terms of language, in terms of like framework and so many things. So thank you so much, Tak. And Melissa, anything you want to say on the topic of I'm just trying to think on the topic of, normalization, essentially.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you so much. I go back to that sort of authenticity and agency piece and around how, we often talk about taking up space, making space, taking up space. And so, what might that look like when we're thinking about periods and menstruation around taking up space and playing big with it? I think about the menstrual sort of revolution that's happening, particularly with companies like Easy Period or Diva Cup. That's saying that there's another way. You don't have to buy into this big business. You get to determine it. So I think about those pieces. And then I also think about the relationship with menstruation and menstruators, period. See what I did there? Because another one coming for you, because our personal lives and our professional lives have bled into each other in an unprecedented way, given this pandemic. And so, what might that look like as we think about hybrid workplaces? What might that look like if we're thinking about getting back on site with each other? Because, being remote definitely been in my sort of calm nook as I move through these cycles. So those are some things that come up for me. April 1st is a new moon. And, that time can be really great for ideation, for setting intentions and goals, for planting those seeds. And so, what might you want to plant? What seed might you want to plant this Friday? What intentions or goals? How might you drop into that part of your body in the diaphragm and womb to help guide you there as part of that, sacred part of ourselves, that powerful strength part of ourselves?
Thank you. Thank you. I could listen to the two of you talk in general and specifically on this topic for hours, for hours. And thank you really for bringing in the context of the pandemic, Melissa. And what that maybe has done to this conversation. Because pre-pandemic in some of the post-secondary spaces I was in, I saw movements around free period products. And, I've thought throughout this whole pandemic, as we haven't been accessing spaces in the same way, what does that mean, in terms of our access, our ability to be able to afford and just to get these free products. And I think that is something that I didn't see too much conversation around, like so many other things during this time. And, also what might this mean for, our body liberation movements also that I've been thinking about, like that where I've seen, really great conversations around size and really good conversations around colorism and so many other things. But might this also menstrual well-being and plurality and constellations also offer something in terms of body liberation and freedom? So just wanted to say that, there's so much that the two of you have left me to think about, and really hoping that this conversation offers the folks who are listening like an entry point into this conversation, or maybe validates an experience, or maybe even offers you a completely different viewpoint that maybe you hadn't considered. And just as we end, is there anything, Melissa or Tack, that you want to say? And totally fine if not. We've covered so much ground and literally been to the stars and back. But just in our remaining minutes, I wondered if there was anything that came to mind that you wanted to offer to end.
I love that what my body is telling me about resistance. I'm still sitting with that. And I'll also go off of freedom as well.
Thank
Thanks so
you.
much. Thank you to both of
Thank you
you.
for that. Thank you. And Tak, anything you're sitting with or you want to offer?
Yeah, I just want to share my gratitude, honestly, to both of you for being here with me today. And to anyone out there listening, watching us, and being here with us, just immense gratitude to you all for being open to this conversation, to this space, to all of this ideating and body work we've been doing. So that's it on my end.
Thank you so much, both of you. I'm sitting with so many different things, constellations, intersectionality, context, colonial mindset, on and on and on. And just wanted to say to anyone out there who's listening and who is maybe still finding their way, as we all are, in relation to this topic, that it's, for me anyway, it's an ongoing conversation. And I think we're all hoping that there will be more space and room to name some of our experiences, whatever they may be. And on that note, we will say goodbye for now, and we'll see you next time.